Hello, welcome to this video. My name is Roger Perkin, and in today's video we're going to be going through the Ansible configuration file, the Ansible host file, and my custom folder setup. If this is your first time here, then welcome. My name is Roger, as I've said. I'm a CCIE, I'm based in the UK, I'm a network consultant, and I talk on this channel about automation and Ansible and Python. And if that's your thing, then you're in the right place. Hit that subscribe button to be notified of new videos, and let's get started into today's topic. It's a bit late tonight, so I'm just going to turn this off and let's get into it. So I run Ansible on an Ubuntu machine, and by default Ansible installs into CD. Let's go back and show you where it is. So cd/etc/Ansible. So this is where by default Ansible installs, and if we list that folder, you can see out the box we get three things: an ansible.cfg file, which is the Ansible config file, a host file, and a roles folder. So if we just check the ansible.cfg, so this is the default global configuration file for Ansible, and these are all the defaults for every particular option within Ansible. Now, as you can see, every single one is commented out. So if we just go right to the top, you can see, so here we have, these are all the defaults, and the few that we need to look at. This is the main one, the inventory. So this is the by default where Ansible will look for your inventory file. And for those of you that are not aware of what the host file is for, the host file is where you keep a list of all the devices that you want to automate with Ansible. So if you wrote a playbook and you didn't have any other host files configured anywhere, Ansible would look in this location for that file. So if we go into that file, you can see this is the default host file that Ansible will give you. This gives you some examples of how to format that host file. I do have another video. If you click the card, where are we? So there is a card right there, should be there. Click it there now. That video will tell you all about the Ansible host file, but if you need to know about that, then come back. I'll just go it briefly now. I've got one device set in here. This is my Ansible host R1. So that's but we're not using that, so I'm going to show you how that works. But this is default out the box. What Ansible has is a default configuration file and a default host file. What most people do is define their own host files. So let's just go back to where I need to be. Okay, so I put everything on this machine into this folder, my Ansible folder within the network programmability folder. And this is all on my GitHub as well, so I've linked that in the description below. So a link to my GitHub where this folder that we're going into now is completely uploaded there. You can have a look, take anything you like, use it for reference. So there's not huge amounts in there, but I've got a few playbooks and my basic setup. So we're going to skip over now into Visual Studio Code, which is my new editor of choice. A lot of people are using this now. It's got a lot of press. Ansible and Microsoft work really well together. Microsoft developed this Visual Studio Code editor. It has monthly updates and Git integration, Python integration, fantastic. But we're not here today to talk about Visual Studio Code. But if you're wondering what this is and you've never seen it before, I will also drop a link to Visual Studio Code. You can go and check that out for yourself. So we're here today to talk about the custom Ansible config file that I'm putting in So in my folder, my Ansible folder, so this is my main Ansible folder where I run all my test playbooks. So within the same folder as my playbooks that I want to run, I have a file called ansible.cfg, and I have these particular options in there. So we're going to talk through them one by one. So the first one is the inventory location. Now you remember I pointed out earlier that the location of the inventory file was etc/ansible/hosts. So that's where I needed to define every device that I was going to automate. But if you're running your Ansible for many different projects, that single file would get very big and you'd have to do a lot of clever work to just pick out the hosts you wanted. So most people will define a project folder, and within that project folder they will define their particular host file that just contains the hosts relating to that project. So mine ansible.cfg, and within this one it says inventory equals ./hosts. So anyone that knows Linux, this is within the same folder and a file called hosts. So we're looking, when I run a playbook, Ansible will look according to this configuration file for the hosts that are defined in the file called hosts, which lives in the same folder. And that is that one there. And within my home lab here, you can see these are the devices that I am currently automating. Now these are just virtual devices that I spin up on my ESXi server, but that's the format of the host file. So it's this device, Nexus 9K1, this is a 9KV, and the IP address of that device is 192.168.1.210. So that's all that's going to happen there, is I'm telling Ansible, don't look in the default location for the host file, look in the local host file. That means that when I create a new project, so these, I'm not going into projects at the moment, this is just my sort of template folder, but when I go into a project, I'll create all this and I have a playbook that does that, which I'll share in a separate video. But this is just showing you the bare bones of how I lay out everything. So my Ansible config file says look to the host file for the hosts. The second option I have is don't worry about RSA fingerprints. So anyone that's been in networking knows when you connect to a device over SSH, it asks you for it to create an RSA fingerprint. So this is just a simple way to associate the IP address with the name that you are connecting to, so that when you connect the next time, it needs to match, and the fingerprint needs to match, just to give some level of security. If you go and change the IP of that device and try and connect again, it would say the fingerprint's changed. Now, this is a great security feature, but when you're labbing at home, when you're learning Ansible, every time you connect to a new device or you change the IP of a device, it does become a bit troublesome, because Ansible will not connect to that device if the fingerprint has not been accepted. So in order to connect successfully to a device with Ansible over SSH without this feature set to false, you would have to SSH to that network device first and accept the fingerprint from your control host. So you can do that, or you can just set this file, this line, to say host key checking equals false, which then does not bother about the RSA fingerprints, which is great for your lab environment. In your production environment, you might want to keep it to true, and then just before you connect to each device, you have to physically SSH to that device from your host machine, and then the next time Ansible connects, it will go in and connect perfectly. So the next option I always put in is this one, retry files enabled equals false. So what that does is stop Ansible creating retry files. So Ansible's got this feature where if a playbook run fails on a certain number of devices, it will create this retry file which just includes those devices which failed the first time. So if you had a playbook run that was going to hit hundreds of devices and 2 failed, you wouldn't want to run the entire playbook again. So you would then run the retry file, which would only target those 2 devices. That's great in production, but in a lab environment, when you're doing lots of things, making lots of mistakes, lots of things are failing, all that you end up with in your root folder is just lots and lots of these retry files. So just disable this for now, and then you don't have these endless retry files building up over in this folder which you have to keep deleting. Do not gather facts is the next one I use. Now this used to be done by putting gather facts equals false within the playbook, but I recently discovered you can do it this way and just put gather equals explicit. It does the job. So Ansible, when it was used, or still is used, for automating Linux servers, it always gathers the facts, so it gets lots of information about that Linux device. You don't want to do that when you're connected to network devices, so we just disable that feature. And something new which I've had to put in since Ansible 2.8 was defining which Python interpreter I was using, because I was defaulting to the 2.7 Python interpreter. So I found that this line, it was throwing a warning, it wasn't breaking anything as such, but putting this line in here fixed that problem. So just to recap, Ansible is my folder where I put all my test playbooks. Within that folder I have a file called ansible.cfg. That is my custom Ansible config file. Also within that folder I have my host file, and the ansible.cfg file references that host file. So this is the bare bones of how I start to lay out my Ansible folder structure, and in the next video we'll be going over how to set up a project, and I'll share with you a playbook that I have that automatically sets everything up for you. So I hope you enjoyed that short tutorial on Ansible, and if you enjoyed this content and you would like to see more, then please do hit that subscribe button. You'll be notified then of when I upload a new video. Have a look around the channel, there are loads of other videos on Ansible, and if you want to go even more deeper, I do have an Ansible course, which there is a description in the link below as well. Click on that, have a look around. My name is Roger, it's been great talking to you, and I will see you in the next video. Good night.